And he almost broke down in tears because he was like, man, if I'd asked myself that question 10 years ago, I would not have become estranged from my family. I would not have gotten divorced from my wife, and I would not have torn my health to smithereens.
We get the glasses of champagne and we cheers and we say we did it. We absolutely did it. We didn't think we were going to do it, but we did it.
And now he makes $70,000 a month from his bedroom with just him and a freelancer on Upwork.
I love that you're not just a boring business crowd. Look at this. We're ready for a good evening tonight. We're going to have so much fun in conversation with one of my great friends, Ali Abdaal. What most people come and talk to me about is this idea of building a lifestyle business, a global small business, the ability to build something where you can live and work from anywhere, that you can explore your true passions, that you can add value to millions of people, and that you can make a lot of money along the way. So Ali is a living example of the opportunity that's right for the times that we're in. So please make him really, really welcome, Ali Abdaal. So what we're going to do is just talk through these key ideas and we'll discuss it, and then we'll open up for Q&A after we get through our 10 big ideas. So big idea number one, Ali, is this one for you, which is, take us back to the time where you asked yourself this question.
Yeah, so when I first started medical school when I was 18, I'm 29 now for the record, so 11 years ago now. When I first started medical school, I would always ask this question to other doctors that I would meet. I would ask, if you won the lottery, would you continue to work in medicine? Would you continue to practice medicine? And half of the people said they would leave immediately. One guy even said he would leave in the middle of the operation. And the other half of the people said that they would still practice medicine because it's fun, but they would go part-time. In all my years of asking this question, 11 years now, I've never met someone who says, yeah, I love working 60 to 80 hours a week in the NHS, and I would choose to do that if I didn't need to worry about money. And so for the people who would go part-time, I would always ask them, hey, what's stopping you from going part-time? Why not cut down to 3 days a week or whatever? And the answer was always about money. It was always that oh, I've got a mortgage, got the kids, private school, all that kind of stuff. And so that was a realization to me, aged 18, that, okay, if I want to build a life that I love, then I probably want to take care of the money thing by having some sort of business on the side so that I can make money, and then so that when I'm practicing medicine, I'm doing it for fun rather than purely for the money. And so that was why I decided to start my first business. I was teaching courses, helping people to get into med school. 5 years later, started a YouTube channel as Lead Generation before I knew what lead generation meant. And then we had a podcast where you said everything is downstream of lead generation. I was like, whoa, shit, everything is downstream of lead generation. I just never... And so I sort of built the business, and now I've gotten to the point where I like to ask this question to other entrepreneurs, because now I hang out with other entrepreneurs, as I'm sure you guys do as well, and I like to ask the question, if you won the lottery, and these days for entrepreneurs winning the lottery is like 100 million in the bank, whereas for normal people winning the lottery is like 1 million in the bank. So if you had 100 million in the bank, what would change about your calendar? And this is a really thorny question to ask entrepreneurs. Because even the ones who already have net worths of millions to tens of millions are still chasing money at the expense often of their health and relationships. No. And so I was hanging out with, I spent some time in this mastermind in Mexico a few months ago, and there was this guy, he's 42, sort of managing $3 billion of real estate in Texas or something like that. And I sort of casually threw this question out, and he almost broke down in tears because he was like, man, if I'd asked myself that question 10 years ago, I would not have become estranged from my family. I would not have gotten divorced from my wife, and I would not have torn my health to smithereens. And so when it comes to making decisions about my business and my life, because the two are sort of integrated, as you guys will know, I like to ask this question again. If I genuinely won the lottery, what would I actually choose to do? And another way of phrasing this is, how would I use my talents to serve other people? Because, as you guys know, if you've had a big exit or you've made a bunch of money, chilling in Thailand and sipping cocktails is not actually that fun for more than a couple of weeks. You then start to feel a bit bored. You're like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And most entrepreneurs who've had an exit will just start another business because it's really fun, right? Entrepreneurship is like a video game. It's super cool, right? It's just fun. So how would I use my talents to serve others? So I ask this question a lot, and this is what is almost like my North Star these days. Because it's the business makes a couple of million a year in profit. I really don't need more money, even though the temptation is always, hang out with Daniel, be like, oh, it'd be nice to make more money. That kind of thing. Be like, he's got a really nice house, and oh, you know, kids are expensive, and like, maybe I need more money. I always ask myself, like, let me act as if I've already got 100 million in the bank, and then make decisions about what I do with my business and my life based on that. And that usually takes me down a direction of, what do I actually enjoy? And for me, it's like, if I had 100 million in the bank, I'd still make YouTube videos, I'd still write books, I'd still do talks. I probably wouldn't try too hard to sell our online courses. Ugh, okay, cool, that's something I'm doing just for the money. But everything else on my calendar would broadly stay the same. And if my calendar deviates too much from this like 100 million version of my calendar, I start to know that like there's changes that need to be had.
Very nice.
Does any of that vibe with you?
It totally vibes with me, and I've spoken to a lot of super successful people who get to the point of burnout. Actually, on Stephen Bartlett's Instagram account yesterday, he posted this photo with his head in his hands, and he was absolutely burnt out. Did anyone see that picture that he posted? Right, he's totally smashed to smithereens. And I spoke to him and had a really good chat with him off the back of that picture. And it's interesting because he said to me, I've bitten off more than I can chew. I've said yes to too many things. I've got to rein it back in a little bit. So it's that kind of question of, before that happens, what do I want my calendar to look like? The similar idea that I had, which kind of resonated, was this idea of origin, mission, and vision alignment, which is that our lives should flow nicely from the moments in our past where we had really profound learnings and we had interesting experiences and where we did something that was a unique part of our story, into an alignment with what we want to see happen in the future, the vision, and then that between those 2 points guides us as what would be the most high value things that I would do today. And it's almost like zooming out from your life and seeing your life as separate and seeing kind of like a character in a movie or something. And it's like, you know, there's an origin story to the character, there's a vision that the character wants, there's something that the character really wants to have happen in the world, and then there's these really important things that the character is doing today. And it's kind of like, how do I look down from above on life and sort of say, am I in alignment with that journey, which I call the OMV story. So those two ideas were very aligned when we both made our notes separately, so that was really good. So the activity on this one is, what would you love to spend a year doing to improve the world if time and money were no obstacles? So if you've brought a pen and paper today, that might be something to have a little journal on, or a little, like, make a little note of, or just even photograph that slide if you want to reflect on that later. Any questions on that key idea? Let's just jump a question or two in if there is a burning one, and if not, that's totally fine as well.
I have a question. You know, can you tell us your Batman analogy? I use that so often when I'm doing sort of pseudo coaching sessions with other creators, and people always like,
stealing my shit?
I steal your shit. Yeah, it's great. I do always credit you. I think you've landed on a few podcasts thanks to that analogy. So.
You have actually. Yeah, no, in fairness, you have promoted me to a wider audience. Only 3 million people, but. The Batman analogy is like, we love Batman, and Batman is one of the enduring characters that just keeps going back into fiction, and it's kind of like, it's a character that has stood like many, many decades of time. And we love the fact that Batman, it's like such a weird dude. It's like this guy who's a billionaire and he dresses up as a bat, and you know, and he roams around at night beating up people, and is he a goodie or a baddie, or like, what's his story? And then, he was at age 10, he was the victim of crime, and you know, he wants to see Gotham City free from crime. So he's got a vision of Gotham City free from crime. It lines up to his origin story, and now that guides what he does today, which is, that's why he dresses up as a bat. Now it all makes sense. So you kind of want to say, well, what's my less weird version of that?
Yeah, so the way I describe it with other creators or entrepreneurs who are like, I don't know if you have this, but like I find myself kind of becoming a bit of a therapist for other entrepreneurs who are like, when I'm having
you know
dinner
I
and
have
stuff.
this.
Yeah, and every time we hang out, you're that therapist for me. And often, like, when it comes to a problem with the business or anything, it's helpful to take a step back and think, okay, what is the mission and vision here? And people are always like, well, like, what's the difference between mission and vision? I don't really know. And so the way I describe it, stealing your analogy, is like, the vision for Batman is Gotham City free of crime, and mission is the thing that Batman is personally doing to get there.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Inspector Gordon, his vision is also Gotham City free from crime, but he's not dressing up like a bat. He's like working at the local police force and like trying to do things by the book. And so multiple people can have the same vision, which is like this world I want to see, Gotham City free of crime, or like in my case with the YouTube channel, I want to see, I want to see a world where everyone has built a life they love. It's like, okay, cool. That's like a big thing. I'm never actually going to get there. But my mission is, what is the small thing that I can do to contribute to that greater vision? Which to me is like making YouTube videos on the internet and interviewing cool people on my podcast and Daniel Priestley. And hopefully that contributes towards that vision in some small way.
Since formalizing those 3 points, has that guided more and more of your decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just so helpful.
Makes life easy, doesn't it?
Because like once you've achieved a certain point of success, you start then getting inundated with like a zillion opportunities, as lots of you guys will know. And it's a cliche, but it's about like saying no to the 99% of things. And we often think, okay, is this actually in line with our vision and mission? Using the Batman thing that you kind of taught our team.
Well, using my one, my vision is I want to see entrepreneurs solving the world's most meaningful problems. And my mission is to develop entrepreneurs who stand out, scale up, and make a positive impact. So it's very simple. Like any business I'm involved in a ton of businesses, but it's like, does it do those two things? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, I can get involved in that. If the answer is no, then it's an easy no. So it kind of like keeps, even though I've got like 8 businesses in the group and they all do different things and they've got different brands, that is the central glue that kind of holds them all together. All right, let's go number 2. So idea number 2 was GPS.
After having a bunch of like dinners with you that turned into therapy sessions, and our mutual friend Eric Partaker, who's my CEO coach, a lot of, when you work with a business coach, a lot of it just comes down to like people like you and Eric would just ask me, okay, but what's the goal? Like, what's the thing you're actually trying to work towards? In your case, you would tell me, do you want a lifestyle business or do you want a performance business? You guys might be familiar with that analogy and all that kind of stuff. It's like, what actually is the goal? And in the past, I used to be very anti-goals because I used to think like, James Clear said in Atomic Habits, it's not about the goals, it's about the system. Everyone who's running the Olympics, 100-meter sprint, they all have the goal of winning, but only one of them is actually going to win. So really, it's about the system. It's not about the goal. And I think because of that Kool-Aid, I threw out the idea of goals. And I was like, okay, well, it's just about the system. But I've realized a lot over the years, especially when you have a team, and even like as an individual in my life, just it gives me a lot more clarity on figuring out what to do with my business and with my life when I actually ask myself the question, what actually is the goal? When I'm doing Q's and A's with creators and entrepreneurs and stuff, people will often ask a question, and it's like it's not quite clear what the question is within the question because there's a bit of a ramble. Maybe you guys have that in the strategy sessions as well. And this question of like, what's the goal? What are we actually trying to get to? Massively dictates everything else. And so I started thinking about this sort of 3-letter acronym GPS, like goal, plan, system, which is what's the goal? Why is that the goal? P for plan. What is the plan that we are currently following to get us to the goal? And I would define plan as what are the 3 to 5 major moves that are happening? And then system, what is the system we're following that will help us stick to the plan? So to use an example from my personal life, this is now the format of goals that I use for my business and also my life. So in my life, for example, my 2024 goal is to get into the best shape of my life, for whatever that's worth, because I want to take my health seriously and all of that stuff.
You're looking good, man.
Thanks, man.
You've got the pump.
Nice.
You got the pump.
Yeah. I don't know that reference.
Once upon a time, there was this actor called Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, okay.
You've heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him. He's like a YouTuber, right?
He's a YouTuber.
Yeah. So goal is get into the best shape of my life, and then plan is what are the 3 to 5 major moves that'll get me there? And so in the health front, it's like, okay, well, if I hit the gym 4 times a week with a personal trainer, have 150 grams of protein a day, eat broadly healthily, and try and get 10,000 steps. If I did those 4 things, I would basically be in the best shape of my life. So the plan has a high likelihood of getting me to the goal with very little luck required. And then the system is great. Now that I know what the goal and the plan is, what is the daily and weekly system that I'm going to be following in order to stick to that plan? And so, for example, every morning in my morning journaling template, I have a question being like, how are we going to get 150 grams of protein today? It's really freaking hard to get 150 grams of protein a day unless you ask yourself that question every morning and you think, right, well, protein shake in the morning, protein shake after lunch, let's have a high protein dinner, that'll get me to like 130, and then I'll have like a...
Hunter deer.
Yeah, exactly, all of that stuff. Surprisingly hard to get 150 grams of protein. Part of that is like the perfect repeatable week, like, blocking out my personal trainer sessions in the calendar 4 times a week, paying for them in advance so I feel like I have an incentive to show up rather than just canceling it last minute. And whenever I break anything down into goal, plan, and system, it just gives me enormous clarity on what the thing is. So I do it for health, do it for relationships, do it for business. It's kind of like OKRs-ish, but like less boring sounding than OKRs, and also it's more than brandable, and it's IP, and it's good for the personal brand and all that, so all of that,
You need
all that
some
stuff.
Of that. You need some of
You
that.
need some of that.
And the prepackaged goals, we talked about this idea of finding someone who's already got the thing and looking at their goal plan and system. One of the things I've noticed with entrepreneurs is they set goals based upon what they imagine success would look like, but it's often very off base to what it actually looks like when you get there. So if you imagine someone who's at the base of Mount Everest and they think, oh, I would love to just run up Mount Everest and I'd love to do that in my running kit. And anyone who's been up there says that's probably not how it's going to work. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to go at it in stages, and you're going to have certain kit and certain investment and certain time frames. And it's really good to kind of really tune into this idea that someone's already done the thing and has pre-packaged up what it looks like. Very worthwhile figuring out what are the attributes. The most common one that I deal with is the lifestyle versus the performance business. So many people think the lifestyle business is going to be a solopreneur thing. I'm not going to have a team. It's like, you're absolutely going to have a team. You're not going to have a lifestyle if you don't have a team. You're going to have between 4 and 12 people. When you get to this point that you call a lifestyle business, 4 to 12 people are going to be around you, and that's what it's going to look like. And you're not going to be pinned down to a local geography. You're going to be able to have clients and customers and people all over the world. So there's these attributes that kind of almost cookie cutter that you should kind of go looking for the person who can tell you what the reality is going to look like versus the fantasy. Digital assets was the similar one for me. So this was the big epiphany I had, which was that we're living in a new economy. And then when I was growing up, the big assets were houses and stocks and shares and bonds and all those sorts of things. And then I started to realize that there's these new economy assets, and it was basically intellectual property, media and software, and now data. So IP, media, software and data. And that these were the building blocks of the digital economy. And the more of this stuff you own, the more you have this whopping big asset. And the next big insight that I had was that these assets are profoundly undervalued. That effectively, if you go out and buy a house in London has a 1,000-year history of London being around. So it's all priced into the equation. Everyone knows what a house is worth, and there's there's a market for it and all of those sorts of things. So effectively, you're going to pay £1 million for that asset, even if it only generates 30, 40 grand a year. Whereas a YouTube channel, you might spend 30 or 40 grand setting up a YouTube channel, and it might generate 30 to 40 grand a year. So, there are certain new economy assets, maybe that's a little undervalued, but there are new economy assets that that effectively are profoundly undervalued. Data, intellectual property, media and software being the big ones. If you take something like ScoreApp is something that's probably had around £800,000-900,000 worth of development go into it at the moment, but it now has 5,000 plus people around the world who use that product, in 152 countries. So it's one of those things where, for less than the cost of a 2-bedroom flat in London, you can build something that has, a massive scalable upside with these new economy assets. Okay, we've got to move on.
Oh, just on that note, it's interesting you use the real estate example because, once I started making money off of YouTube, I was like, oh, okay, I should, buy a flat and rent it out because that's what you do. I was like, okay, cool, let's do that. And so I have this flat in Manchester that cost like £350,000 to buy. Cost another bunch with like lawyer fees and all that shit. And it makes like 10K a year in rent or something. And it's like, okay, cool. £350,000 to buy this thing, and I couldn't even buy it with a mortgage because like my company didn't have 3 years of accounts and all that BS, so I had to buy it in cash and all of that stuff. So it'll take like 35 years to recoup the original investment on this 350 grand, and then in theory, hopefully, it has capital gains over time, which might, I don't know, inch up the yield very slightly. But I was looking at I've made like 800 YouTube videos in my last 7 years, and a bunch of those YouTube videos are cash flowing way better than literally the rental property I have in Manchester that has like these 2 tenants in it. And it's like we've got one video that's about like I think that video that we have about that with you, like the castle method. It's like that video makes like I think several grand a month, and has done for the last couple of months. Similarly, online courses. In September 2019, I made an online course, chucked it on Skillshare. It was about how to edit videos. Because I'd been editing videos for 2 years. I was like, oh, I've learned a few things. Let me just make a course on how to edit videos. It took me 1 day to film, paid a freelancer on Upwork for 2 days to edit it. And that course has been making £3,000 a month on Skillshare without any promotion for the last 5 years now, since September 20, like 4.5 years. We've done no promotion for it. And it's like, damn, that's like having 3 rental properties. That would cost you £1 million to have 3 rental properties making £3,000 a month. What the fuck? How is this possible? And
it has no hot water system.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to deal with maintenance. Actually, the only maintenance we had to do on it was that in that course, I made a joke in like 2019, which was like okay in 2019, but not okay in 2023. And someone complained to Skillshare, so they took the course down for like a day when we had to re-edit the video to cut out the joke. I'm not going to tell you what the joke was, because I don't want to get cancelled for it. But like now when I make YouTube videos and when we make online courses, I genuinely think of it as like, whenever I feel like, oh, it's a lot of work making a YouTube video, I'm like, well, at least it's not a rental property. So, yeah, man, digital assets, so good.
So what system or asset would massively improve your business? I believe that everything that is frustrating in business is an asset deficiency. So in our businesses, we always label things asset deficiencies. We don't have problems, we have asset deficiencies. We don't have frustrations, we have asset deficiencies. So there is something that's missing that is an asset. It could be data, software, media, IP. And as soon as that asset shows up, suddenly that asset deficiency is fixed. So we always label anything that is a shortcoming as an asset deficiency within the business. Really powerful way to look at it, and a really powerful way to get straight onto asking the question, what asset would solve this? So that would be the key question to ask. Let's go to our next one. Okay, so my personal brand is an asset that needs to be built and protected.
Oh yeah, this is, I think again, this was from your key person of influence, Kool-Aid, that I first drank in like 2020. I think, yeah, 2020 was when I first discovered Oversubscribed. Great book, by the way, if anyone hasn't read it. Oversubscribed was what took our business from like 1 million to like 4 million in like a year. It was also the pandemic, but also Oversubscribed helped. And
helped with one of those.
Helped with, yeah. And then after reading Oversubscribed, I read Key Person of Influence. I was like, damn, Dan Priestley's been, he was way ahead of the curve in terms of, you were talking about this stuff. I think around the time Gary Vee was talking, like in 2009.
I wrote KPI in 2009.
Yeah.
It was just after Obama had won the election, and I'd seen this. He had this little box on his website called Obama Everywhere.
Yep.
And you could connect with him in all these places. And I was like, that's cool. That's going to be a thing. And I'm like, everyone's going to use this. I sort of immediately said, these engines, these social media engines, these are personal brand engines, and you're going to be able to turn your personal brand into a business asset.
Yeah.
So yeah, 2029.
So I read the book, loved it. I'd sort of accidentally been doing that through my YouTube channel, but that was when I really started to treat that as like a business and think of it as a business asset, the personal brand. Because, increasingly with the whole AI thing, people always ask me like, oh, what do you think AI is going to do to the creator economy? I think what it will do is that it will commoditize the information, like making a video about, or writing an article about information is no longer going to be the thing. Writing a book that has information is no longer going to be the thing that makes you stand out. What's going to make people stand out is the personal brand. Like, I imagine whatever happens with AI, people are going to continue to want to connect with other people. Like, why are you guys here right now? Because you want to connect with other people. Like, you could watch hours and hours and hours of us talking about random shit on the internet, but you've chosen to come out on a cold day to come to an event because you want to connect with people, the people around you, and maybe potentially us. And that's going to continue to be a thing. And so, it's pretty standard affair at this point, but the personal brand is an asset that needs to be built and protected. And with my personal brand, the YouTube channel and the socials and the website, everything that's associated with like the Abdaal personal brand, we are increasingly very, very careful about what we attach that personal brand to. Because in the past, I was like, oh yeah, if someone's going to pay me 500 quid for a sponsored video, hell yeah, whatever it is. Never heard of Rosetta Stone, but it seems legit, why not? All that kind of thing. But now we're way more selective about it because we're like, damn, the personal brand is actually the most important asset that we have as a business. Way more valuable than those random rental properties. And so how do we nurture and build and protect the personal brand while also retaining its personal touch?
Did you go through a process of feeling uncomfortable with that idea?
Yeah. This was I sort of felt a bit cringe about it. I was like, oh, personal brand, isn't that just a bit cringy, like all this influencery, lifestyle-y photos on Instagram type stuff. And it was like so the first couple of years of being a YouTuber, I felt weird about calling myself a YouTuber because I thought, oh, people are going to think I'm just one of those influencer type people, and I really was. I just felt weird about like admitting it. But then when I read KPI and
Especially since you were a doctor.
yeah, well, you know,
Now a doctor, now I'm a YouTuber.
I'm an influencer. Yeah, exactly. After reading KPI and recognizing the value of personal brands as a business asset, I was like, huh, actually, your personal brand is your professional reputation. And actually, even doctors have professional reputations. They just don't call them personal brands. And so I just need to focus on building this thing over time. And the other thing, just on this point, we were trying to figure this out the other day with my team around when it comes to, for example, making content online, like making YouTube videos, what is it that gives certain YouTube channels personality or like soulfulness or whatever word you want to use compared to others that feel a bit more sterile? And the conclusion we landed on was deliberate or like sort of soul comes from under-optimized stuff, under-optimized content. So for example, on YouTube, anyone, can you have a show of hands? Who here makes content in some capacity to promote their book? Okay, basically everyone. Okay, that's good. Fantastic. When it comes to content, like, let's say if we take YouTube videos as an example, there's all this stuff around like titles and thumbnails are really, really important. And you really have to find the perfect packaging. And then you try and get the editing really good. And you try and present yourself really well on camera. And the problem is that if you do too much of that, you end up going off like the other end of the curve and it becomes too sterile and it becomes too corporate. I find this is a problem with reading off a teleprompter. Yeah, the video is more like concise, but it loses something. It loses some personality, some soul in being so perfect, in being so optimized. And so we're thinking about this for our YouTube channel, like how do we retain the sense of personality? And it comes from under optimization. It comes from leaving in a bit of a ramble, even though we could cut it out in the edit to increase the retention graphs. It comes from not being so like following the trends and following the best practices around the first 30 seconds of the video. It comes on adding in that humor or that charisma or that personality or that joke, whatever, that may not necessarily directly hit the aim of the piece of content, but it does build that underlying asset, which is the vibiness or soulfulness or the personality of said personal brand. Yeah, I don't know if you think about this at all, like personality-wise.
I think you do this really well. In your videos, you leave in clunky jokes sometimes, and you do that and stuff. I do and stuff.
Yep.
And I actually think that's almost a very signature kind of part that you leave. I leave that. I've never heard you say that the under-optimized content is what gives it the soul. I think that's really powerful. I think too, the interesting thing about your channel is that people very quickly get the idea that doctor turned YouTuber, and that's an immediate hook. It's an interesting thing of like, oh, this person's done something that few people have done. And it's easy to spot it in somebody else, but I've spent the last 20 years, 15, 20 years talking to a lot of entrepreneurs who say, I don't have a hook, I don't have anything interesting about me. We talk for about 5 minutes to 10 minutes every single time, and every single time they tell me a bit about their story and I go, oh, that's really interesting. You did this and then went to this, or this is this cool thing about your story. And I realized that everyone is completely numb to their own story. Everyone gets bored with their own story. Everyone kind of takes their story for granted. And I used this analogy of you're standing on a mountain of value, but when you're standing on something, you can't see it. And it's like discovering that hook, discovering that thing that brings your story to life in a really simple way. You talked about this idea of AI and how people need to connect with people. One of the most fascinating things I've seen just last week was this footage of Calvin Harris, the DJ, and he's DJing this massive concert. There's like, I don't know, there's 30,000 people there. It's huge. It's all these, stadium and lasers and the whole thing. And it kind of struck me that it's just Calvin Harris's music, and he could literally just edit it, send it, and have someone come and push play, and you could have the screens and the lasers, and everyone could be there. Theoretically, that could actually happen, and there's really not a huge difference. From the back of the room, there's this tiny little Lego man, Calvin Harris, who's like occasionally putting his hands in the air. I thought, why is that? What is it? And it's something about this human, Eiffel Tower, lightning rod. We want to gather around a person. We want to, metaphorically or digitally or in real life, we want to connect with the real person. And it kind of gave me a lot of hope for the future, because I thought, if we still do, like, because DJing has, it's electronic music and it's been going now for, 20, 30 years in a big way. If we still love showing up for the DJ, then there's something that humans have to do where we show up with people. We need to be there with the person. So it kind of gave me this feeling that there's some role that humans have that kind of is represented in that image. In 3 years from now, what do you want to be known for? So this is an idea of somehow shaping your story, shaping your business. What would you like to be known for if someone was talking about you in 3 years from now? And then the idea here is, what book would you like to write that would actually cement you in that role? So for example, by writing the book Feel Good Productivity, Ali has absolutely cemented himself as the feel good productivity guy. And in 3 years from now, a lot more people will know that he talks about productivity that feels good. And it's a great thing to be known for. It's a great niche to have. And anyone who wants to connect with that idea, in 10 years' time, do you think people will still want feel good productivity?
Yeah, probably, hopefully.
For sure. And that book really is that mark in cement. So the key thing I would love all of you to think about is, if you were to write a book that kind of puts your reputation on a document, and people say, oh, you're the person who wrote that book. I read that book. That's amazing. What would you want to write? So that would be the key activity from this one.
There's another journaling prompt along this vein that I find really helpful, which is even longer out. If you imagine yourself attending TED, the conference, and you're in the audience, and everyone in the audience is just absolutely wowed by the speaker that has just spoken for the last 18 minutes, and the speaker's gone off the stage. And it turns out the speaker is actually you, but 20 years in the future. So what is the title of that TED Talk? Like, what is that TED Talk that you from 20 years in the future have come back to give right now, and that has just absolutely blown people away? And that's like a fun little experiment to give us the sense of, like, what's this kind of North Star that we're kind of aiming for? So I asked myself, I ran the annual planning Zoom workshop thing for people who pre-ordered my book in January. And so I was doing a bunch of these exercises. And for me, it was like, there were two ideas that stuck out for my own personal TED Talk 20 years from now. One of them was called the fast track to enlightenment. I like the idea of becoming like a spiritual guru kind of guy, and then like applying productivity to enlightenment and that stuff. Like, that would be cool. That would be a cool TED Talk. And then the other idea that I found interesting was something around, and sort of spiritually leaning, but like kind of body, mind, heart, and soul, an integrated system for living your best life, or something to that effect. And I was thinking, that's interesting. Like, productivity is sort of the mind. I'm getting into fitness now, so that's sort of the body. I've always been reading books about relationships, and that's like interviewed loads of relationship experts on the podcast. So that's like the heart stuff, and then I'm kind of into the spirituality stuff, which is the soul stuff. 20 years from now, how cool would it be if I could find a way to tie all of these elements into like a thing, and that becomes like the thing that I'm known for? I was like, that seems pretty cool. So now I've got the next 3 books planned out based on that.
Very cool. Yeah. What's interesting about that is you didn't mention business. So feel good productivity for relationships, or feel good relationships, feel good
fitness, yeah.
Fitness, feel good spirituality.
Yeah.
But you didn't say feel good business. It's not a big part of your identity, even though you're very good at it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the business stuff is interesting because
I'll write feel good business.
Nice. Yeah. we could collab on that.
We'll collab on that.
Yeah. The business stuff is interesting because the business to me is sort of like the meta game underneath what I'm doing. Like, the thing that I'm doing is trying to help people build a life they love. And it just so happens that in doing so, we're building a business and learning from amazing people, and Daniel Priestley, about building the business and then documenting the learnings. And so it's kind of weird, but a bunch of people follow me, not for the productivity advice, but for like the meta business building advice, which is kind of cool. But it's always been a bit of a side hustle rather than the main gig.
Very cool. And you can convert that property in Manchester into a commune house.
Yeah. Yeah, buy up for the whole like apartment building at some point.
Okay, next big idea is 10 years from now, what is still likely to be true, and how can I use that information to make better choices? What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is something that Jeff Bezos talks about. I think this was in his Lex Fridman interview, but he's also written about it in a bunch of his Amazon shareholder letters. And the way that Amazon moves is they think what is definitely going to be true 10 plus years from now. And his whole theory is that 10 years from now, people will still want low prices and people will still want fast delivery. You can pretty much bank on those things. And therefore, let's invest hundreds of billions into getting lower prices and faster delivery. And then that's the thing that Amazon does. And so I was like, okay, cool. I mean, Jeff Bezos knows his shit, so what can I learn from this? And I was thinking, like, for our business, 10 years from now, what is likely to be true? Well, 10 years from now, it is likely that there will be more content in the world rather than less content in the world. That's probably a fair bet, because increasingly more and more content is being created. 10 years from now, it is likely that people will feel like they have even less time than they do now. So I suspect. And so therefore, 10 years from now, I suspect there will still be value in there being individuals who, you know, people vibe with on a personality front, who can be the distiller of, like, hey, there's like 1,000 best-selling books that have come out this year about productivity, but the distiller is the person you trust to be able to find the signal from the noise and give you the small amount of things you actually need to know that will take your life forward. And so that helps us inform, okay, our content strategy for YouTube. Because the question was, you know, what sort of content can I see still working 10 years from now? It's like book summaries and like roundup, like curation pieces, or like, I listened to every episode Andrew Huberman's ever put out, and here are the 5 things you actually need to know. You know, stuff like that would potentially do really well in the future. It's that sort of stuff that we're thinking of that's helping us. You know, a question that I've been thinking about a lot with my YouTube channel from like year 1 onwards, so in like 2017, was, what does the 10-year-long version of this look like? Because when I started YouTube, I was pretty terrified, because I was like, okay, I mean, YouTubers have a shelf life. There are very few YouTubers who are big today who were around like 10 years ago, and especially in like lifestyle-y stuff, it's like you sort of age out, and like the audience changes and all of this sort of stuff. And initially, I started making videos for medical school applicants. And I was like, this is not going to be, like, 10 years from now, no one's going to want to listen to a freaking crusty 33-year-old talking about how to get into med school.
An amazingly young 33, yeah.
Similarly, after med school content, I started making videos to helping students prepare for their exams. But again, no one wants to hear from a 40-year-old about how to prepare for their exams. They want to hear from the cool 23-year-old about how to prepare for exams. And then I thought, okay, what about tech? Now, tech is an interesting niche of content where actually you see a lot of YouTubers who are big today who were also big 10 years ago. And tech is a niche of content where you, by aging into the space, you actually become more knowledgeable rather than more irrelevant, like it is in other areas. And so how can we make sure that, like, the trends that we're following, or the things that we're doing as a business they would compound in our favor 10 years from now, rather than compound against us 10 years from now. And this is partly why we're making the decision to not make so much stuff and not make so much money from teaching people how to be YouTubers. Because 10 years from now, will I still be the best placed person to teach people how to be YouTubers? Probably not. I can almost guarantee that other people will have taken on, and the systems will have changed, principles will change, like the algorithm will have changed. There will be new stuff. And can I see myself being so interested in the topic of teaching people how to be YouTubers that I want to stay cutting edge for 10 years? Not really. So it's like, okay, that's useful to know. Let's start retiring that product line and focusing on the body, mind, heart, soul shit that I can see myself doing for 30 years, rather than the how to be a YouTuber stuff.
Also, too, you know, feel-good productivity. One of the interesting things is that companies, large companies especially, are going to really struggle to get people back in an office. I don't think 10 years from now we will have all swung right back to where it was in 2019, and we're all like, yay, we're all back in the office, you know. I can't see that happening. So then 10 years from now, it's like, okay, they're all going to have a hard time with productivity. How do we measure it? How do we drive it? How do we make sure that people are productive? We've got people all over the world now. You know, it's you know, people struggle with isolation, all of that sort of stuff. So becoming the person who does feel-good productivity, especially with remote workforces and all of those kind of things, and people having to be self-directed and self-guided, you know, if you compound that, it becomes a bigger and a bigger and a bigger thing over time.
That's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. That's actually good. Nice.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
Yeah.
Similar idea that I had was to this one was reverse engineering the future versus forward engineering the past. So this is a huge idea for entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs who really, really do well are reverse engineering the future, and the entrepreneurs who are struggling are forward engineering the past. So forward engineering the past is like, well, what have we done previously, and we just try and do more of that. And reverse engineering the future is saying, this is a snapshot of what it would look like if it was perfect, and how do we get closer and closer to that snapshot? So the analogy that I like to use is a property developer. The property developer doesn't break ground with their property development unless they know exactly what the building is going to look like when it's done. So they're like, okay, on opening day, it's going to be 10 stories, there's going to be a retail space down here, and we're going to have 2 penthouse floors, and there's going to be this many 3 bedrooms, this many 2 bedrooms, this many 1 bedroom places. We're going to have, this kind of modern looking thing. So they've actually got a model and a design and all of that sort of stuff. So they're really going through the process of reverse engineering that future rather than forward engineering the block of dirt and seeing what they can put on it. Now, when I look at most entrepreneurs by default are saying, well, here's what I am today, and I'm just going to add something and add something and add something. Then they're surprised that they create an unholy mess. Not pointing any fingers at anyone. So it's this key idea of reverse engineer the future, don't forward engineer the past. It's that thought, and the question I love to ask, one of the questions I love to ask, is 3 years from now or 10 years from now, and I've asked this to your team as well, what do we want to be celebrating? And I always create this little picture that we're at Nikki Beach in Majorca, and we've hired a little booth, and the DJ's playing, and there's a bottle of champagne, and we've got this like thing where we get the bottle of we get the glasses of champagne, and we cheers, and we say we did it. We absolutely did it. We didn't think we were going to do it, but we did it. What are we celebrating? What are we cheersing? And it's like work backwards from that moment. So if that's the moment of the cheers, that's what we're celebrating. What had to happen a week before that? What happened to happen a month before that? What was happening a year before that? So you actually work backwards from the clink. And it's a nice way to think things through. So activity, what do you want to be celebrating 10 years from now?
Oh, just a point on this. I think this is really, really good. I think it is also bad advice for someone if someone's just starting out. Because you speak to a lot of established entrepreneurs, and I speak to a lot of wannabe entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And the wannabe entrepreneurs are so focused on trying to build their perfect architect blueprint for their YouTube channel or their podcast or their business, and they have not taken any action already, or they've not taken any action at all. So they're so wound up in overthinking that, like, actually start with a mound of dirt and start building stuff on the mound of dirt. And don't worry, we'll worry about the skyscraper later on. But let's just get you off the poverty line, or like to be able to quit your job, or whatever the proximal goal is, and then we can worry about building that massive mansion further down the line.
So now that you've pulled the rug from under my big idea, how do we square this circle? I'm thinking about what you're saying. I would say there's two things, which is if you've never built a skyscraper or anything close, then the next thing to build is something that you could build. Put up a tent before you put up a 10-story building, and see how that goes for you. So the other thing I'd say is there's a process of conducting experiments. Start conducting experiments. If you're early in the process, gather data, and just don't see it as a potentially permanent thing. It's a scientist gathering data. So it's really strange. I talk a lot about launch the waiting list. And I say, you have an idea, launch the waiting list. And people are really hung up on like that this is a massive step. But, the gentleman up the back, we talked about this idea of we want to solve the housing crisis, and we want to make sure people who've got a big family home can pass it on to someone who needs a family home. You could easily launch the waiting list for that. You just create a landing page and say, we're tackling the housing crisis. We've noticed that this is the problem, this is the dichotomy. We've seen that there's a huge economic congestion in the economy. We think that there are several key solutions to this. And if you're interested in either putting up your family home, if you've got a family home and you'd like to know more, join the waiting list. If you would like to get a family home using an alternative structure, join the waiting list. And you could just build that in like an afternoon, and you could launch that and see how many people join the waiting list. And as they join, you get them to answer 10 questions, find out a bit about what their hopes, dreams, aspirations, and frustrations are, and now you've got an experiment going.
Yeah. And crucially, you can do that on scoreapp.com.
That's why
There we go.
That's why you're on the cap table. So when you're thinking about someone who's just starting out and you're seeing the classic error, the mistake that you're worried about, when I'm talking about reverse engineering in the future, you're seeing this classic error that you see. Like what is this? You're saying just go make a mess. Is that conducting experiments or?
Yeah. So I have a mental model for this, which is architect versus archaeologist. And this applies mostly to like YouTube channels, but we can sort of extrapolate it to businesses, sort of. An architect is exactly that thing that you described. You would know exactly what the building looks like, et cetera, before you've laid a single brick. But archaeologist is like, I'm not an archaeologist, so please forgive me if there's any archaeologists here. But basically, I think what an archaeologist does is they're like, I reckon there might be some gold over there. Let me go and do some digging. And they dig, and they find nothing. And then they're like, all right, that didn't work. Let me go over there and see if I can find some gold. Dig. Didn't find anything. And then they do this a couple of times, and then one of those occasions when they dig, they'll hear a little clink. And once they've heard that little clink, then they're like, cool, maybe there's something more here, and they keep on digging and then excavating, and before you know it, they've made millions.
So there's two clinks.
Yeah.
There's the clink there or the clink there. You can start with either clink.
And so I would say that for most beginners, archaeologist gets you results. Archaeologist is a better way to go than architect. People starting YouTube channels are hung up on what's my niche going to be. I'm like, bruv, until you've made at least 50 videos, don't ask me that question, because like you just need to make the videos.
He's been hanging out in Manchester.
Yeah, those like flats that I have to put on rental. Cry me a river. Anyway, what was I going with this? Oh yeah, the thing I was saying, it's like, if you are already an established filmmaker and you've got 10 years of experience making documentary films, then okay, you know how to make good videos. And so now that person can feasibly be an architect and can construct their entire YouTube strategy before they make a single video. But for the vast majority of people, I lost count of the number of times people ask questions like, oh, you know, it's so saturated on YouTube, the niche is so crowded. You know, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and productivity and finance, and I want to make videos about all my interests. And I'm like, okay, you and a zillion other people, how many videos have you made? Oh, you know, I haven't started yet. And it's like, okay, let's just make the first few videos, and then I promise good things will happen if you approach it like an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So go be directionally correct, get out there, have some experiments. Yep. I like it. I think this is our last one, and then we can go to Q&A. You're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. And my idea was environment dictates performance. So how would you?
Yeah, so we've all heard this, right? You're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. I think, so...
Everyone's looking around the room. What, I made a big error.
Yeah, the fun question I like to ask myself is, am I averaging up the group, or am I being averaged up or being averaged down? And in an ideal world, I would like to be averaging the group down, ideally, right? And so there were 2 major ways in which I applied this to my business and my life. The first one was when I was broke and didn't have a big business and stuff. And people were like, oh, you got to get around other entrepreneurs and stuff. I was like, I'm in med school. I don't know any other entrepreneurs. And like, I spend all my time studying and stuff. And there's not that many entrepreneurs in like the NHS. So like, you know, what do I do? So I attended a few like bloody med tech conferences, and there's these things.
I can imagine you bothering someone in A&E.
Yeah.
It's like, oh really? You're a business owner.
Oh yeah.
Let me give you this truth serum.
Damn, I should have done that. That would have been good. So I would attend these like medical tech conferences and stuff, and like watch the talks and like not really do anything. And it's like, this really wasn't working. And so the idea that I think I must have gotten this from like Gary V. Kool-Aid, was recognizing that these 5 people do not have to be there with you in person. It counts if you listen to them in your headphones. And so I started listening to all the podcasts from other entrepreneurs making way more money than I was. I started listening to Indie Hackers, which is a podcast called the Indie Hackers Podcast, which is about the stories of mostly dudes and some women in their bedrooms who have built software businesses that are making like lifestyle businesses, one-man solopreneur kind of vibes. I was like, oh, the story of this random kid who's like 15 and found a arbitrage opportunity for domain names that were expiring, and now he makes $70,000 a month from his bedroom with just him and a freelancer on Upwork. What the hell? And you listen to enough of these, and suddenly starting your own one-man software company doesn't seem all that hard, because you're like, oh, I'm just hearing these people all the time. When I started a YouTube channel, I didn't know any other YouTubers, but I was like, okay, let me listen to every other podcast and every video that's ever been made about how to grow on YouTube. And this is what I would be listening to on the way to work, or like while walking, or while at the gym, and just injecting my veins with this content in like a non-weird way. And that like really made everything seem way easier. You know, there's research around this. It's called vicarious mastery experiences. It's in the book, I think, in chapter like 2 or something. And the idea is that you feel a lot more confident about doing something if you hear stories of other people doing the same thing, basically. And so for a lot of kind of YouTubers and entrepreneurs that I speak to, they are the only one around themselves who's into that stuff, because they're the only weird one. Everyone else is more normal and has like a normal job and seems to not think that having a job sucks. You know, all of that for some reason. And if you're not established, it's really hard to find other people. It's not impossible, and we can talk about more about ways to do that. But just sort of consuming loads of content from other people doing the same stuff at a higher level has been incredibly valuable for me. But then when you get to a certain point, it's like, there's not that many podcasts now about how to get a business from 5 million to 10. But now that our business is doing 5 million and I've got a personal brand, it's a lot easier for me to hang out with people like Dan Priestley and, you know, people who are making more money with bigger businesses, who are crucially also enjoying their lives. Because I don't want to hang out with people who have big businesses but are miserable. I want to hang out with the people who are rich and also happy. And the ideas I get from that are the things that are now helping us level up, you know, the B2B stuff. And it's like, oh shit, I wouldn't have heard of that on the podcast. That's cool. So when you don't have other people around you, content can fill that void. But when you do, when you start having those people around you who are on a higher level, and you feel like you are being averaged up, then that's also a great place to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with this whole idea of the YouTube channel. I for those of you who don't subscribe, pay for YouTube Premium, I hate plugging stuff like that, but it actually is great because you can listen to the YouTube. It allows you to listen to it without having to physically have it open, so you can turn any of the videos into a podcast effectively, and it is a really good level up. I had a couple of experiences where environment dictates performance really hit me in the face. One of them was when I got in my early 20s, I got into dancing, and I had no idea that I was going to be into dancing or that I would be any good at dancing or any of that sort of stuff. It just randomly kind of happened. And I turned up to a dance class thinking incredibly, like I had no hope of, you know, fitting in or doing this thing. I kind of like got dragged along. And then by the end of class number 1, I'm doing all these moves and I'm like, actually, I can do this. And I ended up going 3 times a week for about 3 years and became really damn good. And you just can't do it without going to dance class. Like there's something about you turn up and you go to dance class and then you can dance, and it just happens in that environment. There's no way you could do that if you didn't show up in the environment. So that was experience number 1. Experience number 2 was when I started going into prisons, and I was doing mentoring with these young men who were drug dealers in prisons, and I was part of a program where they were coming out of jail, and we were doing these boardroom sessions. We were talking about transferable soft skills that can be transferred from one business to a different business. So we talked about the fact that recurring revenue is good, 24-hour customer support is good, you know. So, but by the way, we genuinely had those chats. We had those conversations about how hard they had worked, how many hours they were working, and how hard they were working. What was their hourly rate in that old business? And we talked through all of those sorts of conversations, and it was very valuable. But what was interesting for me is that I really connected with a number of these young guys, and really realized that in their environment, that was the normal thing to do. That was the only entrepreneurs that they had ever connected with, the only people they'd ever seen as mentor figures. They were all in that business. So it became the most normal thing in the world for them to do. It was normalizing that experience. And by hanging out, one of the things we did in that was we rented these really nice boardrooms and these 5-star experiences, like VIP rooms at Chelsea Football Club. And, we partnered with Chelsea Football Club to get these sort of special suites and really upmarket boardrooms at private members clubs. And we just completely shifted the environment. You can imagine coming out of prison and then the next week you're in a 5-star private members club talking about business opportunities and what business to go. Like, it was a very powerful redirect. And I just kind of got this whole idea of environment dictates performance. But the takeaway is then becoming self-aware. What environments am I putting myself into to normalize that? I recently just went skiing with a group of 80 like super high-end entrepreneurs, like floating companies on NASDAQ and sitting on boards and like literally on boards of reserve federal banks and all of that sort of stuff. And like the level of conversations that happen around the dinner table that immediately make you go, oh, I'm playing way too small, and like, why am I not thinking about this stuff? And these are just normal people as well. They're just thinking a little bit differently. So this idea that you've got to get in the environment. So I think it's good to, I'm going to pull the rug from your big idea.
Nice.
I think it's good to start out on the YouTube channel stuff. And I think that's a healthy diet to do. But I think there comes a point where you've just got to well, you said that. You've got to get around those people and get around those environments that just totally normalize the kind of results that you want.
Oh, just on that note, crucially, let's say you are an entrepreneur making no money and you want to hang out with entrepreneurs making some money. You might think, I have nothing to offer them. Why would they want to hang out with me? All of that stuff. But one thing you have that you can organize, one thing you have that they don't, is you can put in the effort to organize things. Everyone, like, we all want to hang out with other people, right? None of us can be bothered to organize a dinner. It's too much effort. WhatsApp messages back and forth, like emails, calendar invites, like booking of plays, so much effort. So if you are the person who can put in that effort to be the organizer, now you can really punch above your weight class in terms of the people you can hang out with, because you can say, hey, I'm hosting a dinner for entrepreneurs. And all you need is one person to say yes, and then that person becomes, hey, I'm hosting a dinner for entrepreneurs. Dan Priestley is going to be there, or Dan Priestley says he might be able to make it. He's a bit flaky. Would you be interested in coming? And now, before you know it, you're in a group, and then by virtue of being the organizer, you already have like social status in that group, regardless of whether you have a personal brand or not. So I think that is a very underrated strategy for getting in front of people. Just organize dinners.
The very first thing I did when I came to London, 2006, I'd never been above the equator. I had no idea what London even looked like, genuinely. I was quite shocked that it was old and like low, because I'm from Australia, where everything's like built up really high and everything's brand new, and it's like, oh, it's Mary Poppins, of course. So I rock up in London and I've not seen anything before, and I don't know anyone. I literally, like, I've got a suitcase and a credit card, and I turn up in Putney and like I'm there for the first time. The first thing I did is organise a dinner party. So I went and found a restaurant near Chancery Lane with a private dining room, and they had 30 seats, and I just started organising a dinner party, and I put the who's to who of business and people who had big databases. I was basically looking for people who had 10,000 or more on email database, and I was just out there putting together the dinner party. As a result of that dinner party, I had 28 one-to-one meetings in the following 2 weeks, secured most of them to support our launch event. The biggest database had 600,000 email addresses on it, and they agreed to go ahead and promote. We then did our launch event. The entire thing sold out in a day, and I think it was 1,800 tickets. So we sold 1,800 tickets in a day, and this is still we're less than 2 months like on the ground. And then off the back of that, we did £4 million worth of sales in the following 4 months. So I arrived in like July, and by the time we hit Christmas, we had 4 million worth of business secured, and it started with that dinner party. So it was just. And the funny thing was, I thought it sort of had this thought of like, someone has already spent 15 years putting a big email list together. Someone woke up with the email list I'm dreaming of. I just need to like find who they are and do a deal. It's a cracking good strategy.
This is also the benefit. This, I think, is the only benefit these days of starting a podcast. It's so hard to grow a podcast. If anyone's thinking of starting a podcast in order to grow and monetize it, good luck. It's really hard. The waters are very red, as they say. But inviting someone onto your podcast is like, people are way more likely to say yes to that than, hey, can I take you out to lunch, or can I pick your brain over a Zoom call or something like that? You probably, again, it limits the weight class you can punch at, but there are a lot of unknown entrepreneurs. people like Dan who have had personal brands for ages. Dan is very high in demand now. Your threshold for what level of podcast you would say yes to has probably gone up, especially after the Stephen episode. But there are loads and loads of really successful entrepreneurs that no one has heard of who would love to tell their stories. Because what do they do after they exit? They either start another business or they start writing books teaching other people how to become entrepreneurs. And so for that gang of people, starting a podcast to be able to interview them is basically you get a free coaching session that they probably charge like 20 grand for. And you get it for free by virtue of just doing it on Zoom and saying it's a podcast and then uploading it to Spotify or something, which is free, rather than having to, having to pay for that time. So,
yeah, absolutely brilliant.